Hey everybody, Zach from Primrose Productions Music here. Got a pretty quick video for you today. Today I just want to talk about heavy bass or metal bass processing. And the reason I say heavy bass and not metal bass is because this is more of a hard rock song, but the principles that we're going to apply here will also apply in a metal context, although it'll be a little more extreme than it is in this case. So real quick, we're still in the tracking stages of this track here. We got the drums done, we got the guitar done, and we got the bass done. And it's not mixed yet, but I was trying to do just kind of a quick rough mix of what's already there to show you how I would go about processing the bass. So real quick, this is what things sound like right now. So yeah, pretty straightforward. Like I said, it's not mixed yet. It's just early, kind of a rough mix kind of a thing to show you what we're doing. So let's go over the bass. So here's the bass tracks right here. We got these two tracks going into the bass bus, and we're going to solo those, and I'm going to take off all these effects real quick. So right here we have a bass DI track, and we have a bass reamp track. So that's the main thing for any heavy or metal bass processing. This is actually very similar to how I do bass in other genres like softer rock and things like that. But the core of the concept I've shown before, you want to have two separate bass tracks. You want your bass DI, and here, let's real quick just go over the signal chain. We have the bass plugged into the DI box. Then we have the DI box going directly into the interface. That's this track. It's the bass DI track here. Then we also have the bass coming out of the DI box and going into this Ampeg Portaflex, and that is going into a Tracy Elliott 4x10 cab, and that is being mic'd with an AKG D112. And that mic is going to this track, which is the bass reamp track. So generally, for heavier music, you're going to want your bass to be a little grittier. And so that's what we did with the amp. Now, if for this particular thing, I only use the gain settings on the amp, and it's actually not that much gain on it. And what you could do if this was like a heavier metal track, you could add something like a fuzz pedal, like this Deluxe Bass Big Muff that I use a lot when I'm doing metal. So you can have that running into the amp track, but you don't want any of that running into the DI track. You want the DI track to be completely clean, and I'm going to show you why. Real quick, let's just listen to just the DI track. So let's mute the amp track. Pretty straightforward, really clean, and then we'll do the bass amp track. Also, it's actually not as heavy as you might think. Like I said, this is a hard rock song, not a metal song. So you could make this sound grittier with like a fuzz pedal if you were doing a heavier track. But this track on its own kind of sounds bad, and that's kind of the point. So I'm going to show you how we're doing this. Basically, you want your DI track to be totally clean because that's going to be where all your low end comes from, and distortion on low end just does not sound good. And then this amp track is all the high end of the bass, and that we can make gritty as gritty as we want it to be. So basically, the first step in this processing here are these two EQs. I'll show you this one. So this is on the DI track, and we have just a little bit of a high pass, just right around 27 hertz. You could probably go up to 30 just to cut off those sub lows because we really don't want too much sub frequency information from the bass here. And a drastic low pass filter. It's cutting off everything above 234 hertz. And depending on the track, this might change, but generally you're going to want to you're going to want to low pass the DI track anywhere between 200 and 250 hertz on the DI. Okay, and then I'll show you this in a second, but we also notched out a little bit of 60 hertz there. So let's listen to that track on its own the way it is now with just this EQ. Without the EQ, and I'll turn the EQ on so you can see what it's doing. So now if you're listening on earbuds or computer speakers or your phone speakers, you probably just heard the bass disappear completely, just about, because we cut out all the high frequency information, and those kind of listening devices are not good at recreating the lows. So all we have left here is the low end. And then I also tend to notch out, so I recommend you listen on at least good studio headphones, if not actual studio monitors, so you can really hear what's going on here. And then I also tend to notch out somewhere around between 50 and 60 hertz, just a little bit of it to let the kick come through a bit. So let's listen with and without that put in. So that's just cleaning it up a little. It's taking out a little bit of the really muddy part of the low end there. Okay, and we'll touch on this in a second. But then we have the opposite going on the amp track. We are high passing, we're doing a small low pass, and we're taking out everything above about 8K, a little less, 7.5K, and that's to let all the high stuff really shine through. But then we're also doing a drastic high pass filter. So we're cutting out all the low end below 354 hertz here on the bass amp track. And again, this will vary depending on the track you're working on. It's usually somewhere between 350 and 400. Sometimes you might go as high as 450, but it's not that often. But generally between 350 and 400 hertz is where we're going to cut out the low end on this track. So let's listen to that track with and without this EQ. So again, it sounds kind of weird on its own, and it sounds really tinny, and it's just all this high end. And yeah, basically you want to do these separate so you can process these tracks separately. Now, I kind of did the processing on the amp outside the box with the gain. Like I said, I just turned the gain up on the bass amp to get it to the level of grit that I wanted to, but sometimes you might add some extra distortion on it in here, depending on what you're doing. So yeah, so I'm sure you noticed that we actually are cutting out a decent section of the low mids here, because this is low passed at 230 hertz and this is high passed at 354 hertz. So right now we technically don't have any frequency information between 234 hertz and 354 hertz. And the reason for this really is to let the low mids of the guitar shine through, because otherwise it just sounds really muddy with that section in there. And you'll, if you've seen my video where I did bass processing and recording for rock instead, then you'll see that I usually actually high pass at about the same frequency that I low passed on the other one, so we're really not losing any of the frequency spectrum. We're leaving those low mids in, and that's because on lighter stuff you kind of need to fill out the low end a little more because the guitars will tend to be a little higher. But in heavier stuff and in metal, you really want the low mids of the guitar to shine through, so you kind of do that and leave a little space there. So let's listen to the raw bass track without the EQ, and then we'll turn the EQ on. So I'm sure you noticed it sounds a little weird, honestly, but it cleans it up a lot. It's clearly much cleaner and tighter. So it sounds kind of weird on its own, but in the mix, it works. Now I'm going to show you the last couple things I do here. Like I said, you might want to add more distortion on your bass amp track. That's up to you, but do not add distortion to the clean DI. All right, and then the other thing I have here is the Air Frequency Enhancer. This is a free plugin that comes with Pro Tools. And what this is doing is just adding a little more, like some subharmonics to the low end of the DI track. And so the high gain is all the way down because there's no high end in the DI track. I only turned the low gain up to where I wanted. And basically you're choosing what frequency you want the harmonics to come through. And I ended up at 101 hertz, which is actually pretty low. Usually I'll want the harmonics to be a little higher, usually around 160. But in this case, I went as low as 101. So let's see if you can listen to what that's doing. Again, if you're not listening on proper studio headphones or proper studio monitors, you are not going to hear a difference here. But it's just a low-end thing. It adds a little bit of lift to the low end. See, it just sounds a little fuller, a little rounder in the low end with that there. And I will almost always do something like that on the DI track for the low end. Just give it a little extra harmonic frequency in there. Okay, then both of these bass tracks are routed to our bass bus, which is going to our mix bus. And so on here, we're doing just some compression to get everything leveled out so we can really hear it. So first we have the CLA 76. We have a reasonably fast attack, not super fast, and kind of a slow release here. We're using a 20-to-1 ratio, and we'll see how much gain reduction there is. I forget how much there actually is on the track at this point, but we'll see as soon as I turn it on. But listen to what this does before and after. Okay, so it's bypassed right now, but it's showing it's about 10 decibels of gain reduction, which is extreme. But just listen to what this track does, what this plugin does. So this is just kind of adding some energy and some anger is the best way I can describe it to the bass. It's a little punchier, you know? So, yeah, like I said, reasonably fast attack, reasonably slow release. And this may change depending on this track, depending on what the bassist is doing. But this is what I ended up on for this one. But generally, yeah, you'll kind of be, if you want to do that to the bass, you'll kind of be a little bit of faster attack and a little bit of a slower release because you actually want the bass to even out a lot. And then the last thing we're doing here is a limiter. And we're just basically crushing the crap out of what's left of the bass track to make it a really even level. So let's listen to what this is doing here. So this is really extreme. As you can see, normally you might limit it to maybe about here, but I really crushed it on this one. And it's adding, first of all, some volume, but also a little bit more distortion, and it's just evening things out overall. And again, it sounds kind of weird with this. When you solo it, it sounds weird, but in the mix, it works. Let's listen to what it sounds like with all the other stuff. So, in addition to obviously the volume drop off when I turn those off, I'm sure you can hear the difference. It's just the bass isn't as punchy. It doesn't have as much energy when I take away this processing. So, yeah, I just wanted to show you guys this. This is how I process bass for heavier stuff. And again, you can go more extreme with the distortion and stuff on the amp track if you're doing heavier metal. But for this song, that would have been a little too much. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you found it helpful. I've been doing a lot of these kind of mix tutorial videos lately, so let me know what you guys think about them. If you find them helpful, then I'll try to do even more of them. But I've kind of haven't really been in front of the camera in a while, and I'm about to start getting back to that. But if you want me to keep doing things like this instead of the recording side of things, let me know, and I would be happy to show you. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're having trouble getting your music out there, I want to encourage you to go check out my free guide. I call it Your Rise to Stardom. You can check that out at primroseproductionsmusic.com/guide. And basically, that just goes over everything that your band needs to do to get your music in front of as many people as possible, as fast as possible. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you could hit that like button, it really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.